Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the deceptive sexuality trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm planning for today's episode to be a relatively short one that really follows on a little bit from some of the recent topics, particularly the last one, the idea of authentic reality and how important this idea of authenticity or being genuine is to this work, to recovery through the lens of this model. And one of the phrases I use quite a lot when doing this work is the idea of conditions over techniques. So when we're thinking about the attending work in particular, how we can grow in our ability to attend well to the traumatic impacts on the partner, the family system, and the relationship, really thinking about this idea of conditions over techniques. It is not about learning specific techniques. And by techniques, I mean things like scripted empathy statements or validation statements. But as I say that, I want to be very clear that those things are important. We talked about this a little bit on the attending episodes that I did with Dr. Minwala. So learning how to communicate better, learning what an empathic statement or a validating statement looks like, very, very important. So we shouldn't ignore that. But more important are the conditions or the vibes when we are saying those things or when we are using those techniques. So another way of thinking about that is to say that it's not so much exactly what you say, but it's how you say it that really has an impact. So I could say the most beautifully scripted empathic statement that acknowledges my partner's experience, for example, but if I'm saying it from a place of being disingenuous, or it just feels like, that's what your therapist has taught you to say, and it's not really got meaning behind it, then it doesn't lead to safety, it doesn't lead to connection, it doesn't have the desired result. Whereas even a somewhat more clumsy statement coming from a place of genuine empathy and genuine care carries a lot more weight in my experience. And to perhaps highlight a little bit more why this is particularly important to me and is something that I believe in so strongly, I'm actually going to give a little bit of insight into my own therapeutic journey and how this became such a central part of my thinking. And when I decided to retrain as a therapist, I went to a local college and did the course there and trained in what is called humanistic therapy, and particularly focused on Rogerian or Carl Rogers' approach of person-centered therapy, which will probably mean nothing to most people, but some of you will perhaps have an understanding of that. And central to the humanistic theory, or particularly the Rogerian theory, is the idea that humans have an inbuilt, innate trajectory towards healing, towards growth, given the right conditions. And whilst there is more complexity to the theory if you dive in deeper, there is this really simple principle of the core conditions, with the idea being that there are 3 necessary and sufficient conditions in order to see therapeutic change in a client. Necessary, meaning that you cannot see change without these things, and sufficient, meaning these conditions are all you need in order to provide an opportunity for change. And I would add here that the theory has developed over time. There's different branches to it. And obviously in the work I do, there is a lot more than providing those conditions. I believe when we're working with abusive dynamics, for example, we need to work in a very clear, structured frame. But there is still real value to this simple, profound idea that given the right conditions, a human being will innately move towards therapeutic growth. The other central idea in humanistic theory is that the primary vehicle for change is the relationship between the therapist and the client. So this is why the conditions provided are so important. It is only if the client feels safe and can really trust the therapist and really trust the relationship between the two that therapeutic change can actually happen. So coming back to the idea of the 3 core conditions, which are the foundation of developing that relationship, in Rogerian theory, those conditions are unconditional positive regard, congruence, and empathy. So unconditional positive regard, pretty self-explanatory, that the client experiences that positive regard from the therapist, that they are there to help them, that they care about them, that they want the best for them. Then the congruence, and this is a really important point when we're thinking through the lens of this model in particular, the idea that the therapist is showing up as a genuine human being in the room, that there's an authenticity there, that their real self is in the room and they're able to be transparent within the relationship. And transparent doesn't necessarily mean self-disclosure about the therapist's life, but the idea that the inner experience of the therapist is matching their outer experience. They are genuinely present in the relationship and in the room. And then that third core condition of empathy, that the therapist can accurately and meaningfully sense the client's internal world, or can connect with that, can have empathy for that, can sit with and understand the experience that the client is having of situations in their life or in the relationship itself. And so if those 3 core conditions are present, the idea is that a genuine, deep relationship can be developed between the therapist and the client. And then within the context of that relationship, the client has a level of safety to be able to be genuine themselves and explore what's going on for them, what's really going on for them. And therefore, real therapeutic change can happen. Now, the reason I explain all of this, and the reason I think this is relevant, is because this idea of conditions over techniques, or we sometimes talk about attending, not fixing. We're learning in this model to attend to our partner's pain, to attend to the traumatic impact on the relationship, not fall into the trap of thinking we can fix it, or we can use certain techniques to fix it, undo it, or make it go away. And that desire to fix it is so understandable, and it is something I experienced in the training. So when I trained in this way of doing therapy, in this humanistic Rogerian way, it was notable how unsatisfying it felt to me when they were constantly kind of drilling into us this idea of the core conditions and basic counseling techniques to help build the relationship. And in fact, and I can look back on this and smile now, I remember specifically saying to a tutor once, yeah, I get it. This is important. Building the relationship, core conditions. Yeah, I've got that. When are we going to start learning the real stuff, the real psychological techniques? And so there was this deeply inbuilt belief in me that those things weren't enough. Holding space, being empathic, being congruent in the relationship, those things weren't enough. We needed something. We needed the techniques to really be able to make progress, to fix people, if you like. And it was a really significant lesson in humility for me to be able to let go of that desire or even that need to fix, to let go and just trust that it was enough to be present, to be genuine, to offer those conditions, and for that to be the platform for where growth could happen. And so bringing it back to this work, and again, particularly the attending work, the clients I work with, it is completely understandable when faced with the level of trauma, the level of harm that's occurred, and trying to attend to that. Of course, I would wish I could fix it. I wish there's something I could do to make that go away, both for my partner's sake and the distress that she might be experiencing, but also for myself, because how distressing I might find that, how helpless I might feel in that situation, the shame that might come up in those situations. And actually, from those feelings of being stuck, being helpless, from that shame is where ongoing, what we'd call integrity abuse behaviors can show up. The defensiveness, the shutting down, the stonewalling. And so learning to trust that actually just being able to show up, being able to hold that space, being able to sit with, bleed with the person, to be able to hold that story, to be able to look at the story of what I did or have it shown to me, have it expressed to me by my partner, and be able to sit with that is a profoundly powerful thing. And it's a very challenging thing to get to that point. But that is really where we're looking at this attending versus fixing idea, or conditions over technique. If I am there in that distressed state, if I'm fearful of my partner, or if I'm shutting down and my vibes, my energy is very defensive, to a large degree, it doesn't really matter what I say in that situation. Everything about my body language, everything about the vibes coming off of me is not helping provide safety or stability or any kind of foundation for us to be able to move forward. Whereas perhaps if I were able to show up with something like those core conditions, if there was that sense of genuine positive regard for the person, even in their pain, even in the pain that's being directed at me, if there were genuine empathy and validation that isn't based just on some kind of technique, and if there's a genuine congruence, or what I call authenticity a lot in this model, if I'm showing up authentically, authentic reactions, authentic feelings, that really can have a transformative impact on the ability to negotiate this trauma. Again, it does not fix it or make it go away, but it certainly provides a condition where the trajectory can be towards healing. And I often use an analogy for that within the work, which I'm sure I've used on previous episodes, of a gardener growing a plant. Now, does a gardener grow a plant, or does a gardener provide the right conditions where a plant can grow? So yes, you place the seed, but the job is to make sure it's in the right conditions, in nutrient-rich soil, getting sunlight, getting water. And given those correct conditions, the seed will sprout, it will grow, the plant will grow by itself. You don't need to make it grow, you just need to provide the conditions. And that is, again, very much the lens we look through with the Rogerian theory of therapy. And the reason for me talking about this today is I do think it's quite applicable to the attending work. Can you start to provide the right conditions where growth, where healing is possible? And that is why, linking it back to the previous episode about authentic reality, and where I actually shared that introduction I often do in the groups, that is why there is such a large focus on these two principles of self-contact or intimacy with the self, and then using the voice authentically. We cannot be congruent, we cannot show up in authenticity if we don't know ourselves, if we don't know what's going on for us, what's coming up for us in these situations. And if we can't use the human voice authentically to express that, to hold genuine empathy or express genuine empathy for the person in front of us, then again, it doesn't really matter what specific words we use. It's not going to provide safety. It's not going to help someone whose nervous system is in high arousal to ground, to come back into that window of tolerance. And so, as I come to the end of this relatively brief episode, please hear me when I say I am not saying it is bad to learn techniques. There is a lot to be learned in terms of communication skills, how to phrase or how to communicate empathy, how to hold space for another person, how to validate the experience they're having in the moment. But even more importantly than the technique is, are you doing work? Are you doing the therapeutic work or recovery work where you are growing in your ability to show up in an authentic way and provide those conditions along with the techniques where you are setting the foundation for healing? You are setting the trajectory towards safety. Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwalamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.